Hello, my name is Carlo Milano, and this is my economics final project. By the end of this project, I hope that you will understand what poverty is, realize the potential in infrastructure, and kind of understand how it all came to be and what groups of America are most affected by this social phenomenon. Now, let's begin. The common home/education system of America. Now, here the young suffer the most, and children end up suffering due to a lack of resources. Now, a lack of resources. What does that mean? Well, these children's parents are poor and thus they do not have the financial means of giving their children the money they need to go to school. So many of them end up going to public schools. Now, these public schools aren't as well funded as they should be. And despite New York City paying for about $38,000 per student, it really isn't amounting to much. As you see in many private schools, we have better equipment, while public schools end up having broken chairs, they have bad teachers, and then they have drug problems, violence. It's really not going in the right places it should. But it's still money is still technically going to these schools. So as a result, we as a society suffer because our money is being taxed out of us and it's not going where it should. Now, this doesn't mean that paying them more money will fix the problem because as you'll see in the next slide, being paying more per child doesn't necessarily equate to a better education. Now, who's really taxed the most and who suffers the most in this situation? Now, poor people are taxed the most, and this is because poor people make the most transactions per day out of any class in America, and they will end up racking out more taxes on every purchase they make every day. And thus, that means that they will get nearly 8 times more of their income in sales taxes than wealthy families would. Now, how could we really fix the system? Poor people are being taxed the most, and they're also getting the worst education, arguably. Now, there are many ways we could aim to change the system, but my proposal would be to get more moderators to moderate where the money goes. And on top of that, we should create a new educational system and revamp the public school system. Now, on top of that, we are not a lot of public schools do not look at the demographics of their children. Most people who go to public schools are immigrants, and immigrants are 1/3 of them have been reported to be poor in 2019 by statistic. Now, how could that help us determine what could help poor people? Now, they need money, good money, put in the right places, and it really just isn't happening. So I think that we should put more people in power and better means of for these children to have access to the same education we have by revamping the system to have a better infrastructure, better teachers, and better water fountains, better access, better facilities, better everything, so that we could make sure our money is being used efficiently and appropriately. And that concludes this slide. Economic fluidity and the persistence of poverty in America. Now, there's been a change in the standard of living over the past 50 years. Yet, despite this, there's poverty has only fallen by 4%. Now, when people were impoverished, they looked for a way to continue living at the same standard of living those in the city did at a lower cost of living. Now, this ended up with more poor people being concentrated in suburban areas, and that led them with worse property, worse real estate, and worse opportunities to grow their business, their job, and their career. Now, if you look at people in the city, they have rising property value, they have better work opportunities, and they have a higher average salary. Now, if you put combine this with the generational wealth that people in the city have begun to generate over the last century or so, you will see that those who are rich just keep on getting richer, while those who are poor kind of just don't are stuck because they don't have the means of getting better education, better opportunities at work because they aren't really able to afford living in the city. Now, there's even worse things than poor people not having the same opportunities as those in the city. Because of the rising housing costs and gentrification of these suburban areas, many of these previously poor people end up being homeless. And homelessness costs our economy, and it leads to us paying for services that have to aid these homeless people. And overall, they're ending up, most poor people in suburban areas are going to end up homeless or in like really, really bad living spaces. And we as a society have to deal with the homeless people on the streets. And we also have to deal with more crime because of the lack of resources provided to these people as of now. And that leads to the mental health of our overall population declining because we don't have the same opportunities for everyone. And that leads to just people being less happy as we have more taxes, poor people have less opportunities, and the city just isn't a great place to live in if there's tons of homeless. And unfortunately, this has spread it to almost every first world country, and it's been a problem. Um, and because of that, we need to give everyone the same standard, aim to give everyone the same standard of living, and hope to keep everyone in a good standard of living. While there could be a cost of living that is changing, but we still need to give everyone the bare minimum that they need, which is definitely not what they have right now. That is below the bare minimum. They're basically not humans, and I think we need to stop that. Social impact of poverty. Now, charter schools outperform their counterparts, but the situation is often case dependent. More per student doesn't equate better learning, and on top of that, they are tax funded. And as we've seen before, the infrastructure of these schools aren't isn't so good, and on top of that, our money isn't being used efficiently. To add on, our cities are going to be filled with more and more homeless, as according to recent statistics, and London and New York City are even in the midst of a housing crisis. And public investment in US infrastructure as a share of GDP has fallen by more than 40% since the 1960s. Now, our infrastructure is bad and our tax money isn't being used efficiently. So, what would be the solution? Well, that would be to allocate more money in an efficient manner. And one of the most recent laws that is aimed to be passed, the Partition Infrastructure Law, is aimed to propose $550 billion to fix railroads and the city's infrastructure and perhaps and the infrastructures of public schools. On top of this, we really, as a society, will begin to really function better if infrastructure is improved. And in my opinion, I think this is the best way and best approach to improving poverty, as if you raise the standard of living drastically, what the living standards of poverty are now might be completely different than the ones they are in the future. And that will elevate everyone to at least a better standing. Now, I will go on to propose how this will affect America. Now, what does this law entail? Now, what we know is that it's $550 billion pledged, and that it plans to support over 700,000 jobs a year. It also plans to bring higher wages and better working conditions to America. Now, as we know, America's infrastructure is really outdated and in need of renewal, and seizing this opportunity may provide all citizens with a better standard of living and perhaps a kind of futuristic way of doing things. Now, a country in the modern era that already does this is Japan. With Japan's super high-speed railroads and more efficient way of moving throughout, instead, for example, how they make turns and things like that, they are able to have a better way of commuting to work. And on top of that, their trains are always punctual and very clean, and they also are very safe. One thing that could America could learn from this is we could have a new renewal of all the railroads and make sure that infrastructure is not owned by private companies and instead by the government. As we see today, like for example in New York, we have the MTA, a privately owned company that doesn't pay its employees and uses outdated railroads and infrastructure that leads to many delays and many problems, which means that trains are getting delayed, people are not happy, and things just aren't as smooth as they can be. And that leads to a lower standard of living, less job opportunities, and really just not seeing good for the overall society we live in today. Now, if we do fix the infrastructure problem, we get better railroads, we pay people better, we raise the minimum wage, and we allow more jobs to open up. Now, not only are more homeless people gonna go to the jobs, we're gonna create more opportunity for society to help those that are weak and create a really, really high standard of living. Now, this high standard of living may change our perception on what is poverty, and what we think is a bare minimum might actually rise. And maybe people will not need as much food as they needed before, and they might end up getting it naturally from perhaps markets that give out things for free because of infrastructure improvements, or perhaps other things that may be possible in the future. Now, someone will always be at the bottom, but that bottom doesn't have to be as bad as it is now. And my plan is to have everyone invest in the bipartisan infrastructure law and aim to advocate for an infrastructure law improvement in America so that we can have a better overall country instead of living in the kind of dump and shadow of what America could be if it had better infrastructure. Now, a lot of these effects were mentioned earlier, but there's a better life for everyone, and we won't have to smell dog poop or even smell homeless people on the sidewalks anymore. And we will have a happier society, more resources, and everyone will be equal. So, in my opinion, there's no other option than to invest in infrastructure and make it so poor people can at least become betterly poor in a new society that has many more resources than the one we have today. That's all. Carlo Milano out.